So, Rory, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we walk into the future, can you please share a little bit about your background? Where did you grow
Certainly,
up?
certainly. Thanks for inviting me onto your forum, Nick. It's a privilege to be here. I was born in Cape Town in 1963. We moved to Joburg in 1970, I think it was, um, because my youngest brother had a medical condition. The doctor told my parents to get to the Highveld, where the air is much thinner and drier. It would help with the healing of the lung problem, and that's exactly what happened. I went to school here in Johannesburg, Roosevelt High School, matriculated and joined the police, and then immediately went for a year's training. So I left high school in 81, spent a year in the Pretoria Police College in 82. Initially, I wanted to only stay for 4 years while I studied a law degree, and for various reasons that didn't happen. And I ended up staying nearly 18 years. And the last 5 of those years, I was privileged to serve President Mandela as one of his team leaders of his protection team. Yeah.
So, Rory, did you have a dream career when you grew up?
I didn't initially think it would ever be anything like that, but I think with hindsight, looking back now, I think it's fair to say that something approaching a dream career, because I was incredibly privileged, and I do understand how privileged I was, to serve the most famous man in the world at the time. And really, Nelson Mandela and Rory Steyn, their names should never be in the same sentence. I mean, he was a freedom fighter. I was a security branch cop who considered him to be a terrorist. And I was greeted with nothing but respect, professionalism, forgiveness, a reconciliatory hand rather than a fist of revenge. I can't speak highly enough of the 5 years that I had this privilege. So, yes, I think a dream job could probably be quite accurate, Nick.
And I'll never forget when President Mandela passed away. I saw one of your interviews on EWN where you related the moment at the inauguration. I think it was at Union Buildings with the colonel, right?
Yes.
Can you maybe refresh our memory?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, thank you.
So at the time, which was the 10th of May, 1994, I was the police commander of the VIP protection and the bomb disposal unit in Joburg. We received notification that the president would go to Ellis Park, the rugby stadium in South Africa, where just about to the day, a year and a month later, he would hand the Rugby World Cup trophy to Francois Pienaar when the Springboks beat the All Blacks. But that was 95. So this was May of 94. And I thought, well, this is a new president. It's a new dawn on every level in South Africa. I'm still the commander of the VIP unit. I better go to the stadium and do what I would have done if the previous state president had been going to a rugby match there. So we took the sniffer dogs through the president's suite. We posted our men and women, and we waited for the helicopter to fly from Pretoria, where he had just sworn the oath of office, to land. And then the motorcade drove him around the corner. And he arrived a little bit late, and he was never late. It's one of the lessons I learned from him. He was an extremely punctual VIP, extremely so. So the two teams who were playing one another, South Africa was playing Zambia. Zambia were the continental champions. The two teams are lined up on the field. He gets straight into the elevator, the lift. He goes down to the dressing room level and walks out of the tunnel in front of 60,000 football fans, all black, who had just watched on the large screens in the stadium how he swore the oath of office 60 kilometers to the north up the highway. And I mean, I don't think they expected this. He walked onto the field, he shook hands with the teams, he went back up the tunnel, he came back up the lift and immediately apologized, saying to the host, from the Football Association, gentlemen, I've got to get back to Pretoria. I've got 184 serious VIPs waiting for me to host them for lunch. So these were presidents, these were prime ministers, these were royalty, these were celebrities that had come from literally all over the globe. And our job, that of me and my men and women, and we had to, of course, increase the numbers from colleagues around the country. We had to move those 184 VIP motorcades from the five-star hotels that were all in Joburg at the time. There were none in Pretoria. We had to move them, those 60 Ks, up the highway to attend this historic inauguration of the first democratic president. And no sooner has he got into the car, I've kind of taken a step backwards and breathed a sigh of relief, because I've never worked with an all-black soccer crowd before. I've never worked with this man who's now my president, but he's only been president for about half an hour. And nothing happens. The vehicle doesn't move. And we all know it's got to get to the helicopter next door and fly back to Pretoria. He's got this lunch. And we see him trying to open the door of the vehicle, but it's a 3.8-ton armored BMW. You don't just flick an elbow and the door opens. So the protection team leader calls the guy in the car and says, "Why does he want to get out? You know, he's just got in." That guy says, "I don't know. He hasn't said anything to me." So he opens the door. The team leader opens the door and says, "You know, Mr. President." And he doesn't say anything to the team leader. He gets out of the way. The president climbs out of the car that he's just got into, and he walks across the floor of this reception hall behind the president's suite to the vehicle ramp over there, where he should be driving out to go to the helipad. And the only person standing there is the person that you refer to, was an apartheid-era police colonel in his full blue uniform with his stars and castles on his shoulder. And his eyes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the president is walking directly towards him, and he doesn't know why. There's maybe 12 of us, 15 of us, all security officials and police. We just walking along behind the president. Why is he going over there? And he puts out his hand and he stops in front of him and says, "Colonel, I just want to tell you that today you have become our police." He said, "I want you to know that from this day forward, there's no more you and us. You are our police too." And this old warrior, who kind of had the lines on his face to show that he'd done pretty much seen and done it all in a long career, he started to cry. And the tears were running down those lines on his face and dripping on that wooden floor that we were standing on. And the president just patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's okay, Colonel. I just needed you to hear that from me today." And then he turned on his heel, he went back to that car, got into it, went to the helicopter and flew back to Pretoria. Now, Nick, the thing is that my rank was only one rank lower at the time. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time in the police. I did not believe what he said 4 years earlier when he came out of prison in February of 1990. And he said South Africa is for all of people, both black and white. I'm a trained security branch cop. As I said, that's what I expected to hear. That's the party line. I wasn't impressed and I didn't believe it. And yet 4 years later, literally having been president for half an hour or less, he says that to my colleague. You know, if you'd punched me in the nose, I would have been less surprised, because remember, that colonel represented the system that pursued Mandela, that arrested him, that tried him, that convicted him and sent him to prison for 27 years. They actually sent him to prison for life, but he was released after 27 years. And on the very day that he's now got all the power, he's now the president, he takes the trouble to get out of a car that he's just gotten into, effectively saying that 184 of the world's most senior VIPs, you guys can just wait 2 or 3 minutes. This colonel needs to hear this lesson from me today. And he walked across there, and it was the last thing I expected to hear. And I said, "Okay, sir, if you are sincere about this reconciliation thing that you've just demonstrated to me, then I will buy in to what you're trying to do, which was build a new South Africa. Sorry, I just had to kill a phone call there. Sorry about that, Nick.
No problem.
So I said, I'll buy in. If that's the way we're going to do this, I'll buy in. Yeah, and it changed my life, you know.
Now, Rory, not only have you been the team leader for President Mandela, you've also been the chairman of the Security Directorate for the ICC World Cup, and you're currently protecting leaders across the world.
Yes.
Are there any other persons of inspiration, leaders who have inspired you, looking back over your career?
No, you know, President Nelson Mandela set a pretty high bar. And that's why I say to people today, and I'll say to you as well, I hope it doesn't sound arrogant, but people actually don't impress me. One day we arrived at the Union buildings and there was a cleaning lady. We were very early. There was a cleaning lady on her hands and knees polishing the concrete floor with wax polish. And the president came in his private entrance and literally nearly walked into her backside because she was down on all fours. And instead of just walking around her like most people would do and heading to his office, he stopped and he looked down at her and he greeted her. Yes, Mama, he said, and she heard his voice and that accent, and she got a fright. She tried to stand up and greet him. She tried to clean her hand holding this dirty polished rag all at the same time. And he said, no, it's okay, Mama, just stay there. You know, where do you come from? Where do your parents come from? What's your name? How long have you worked here? And thank you for keeping our office so clean. And then he walked around her and he went to his office. And I've never forgotten that lesson. Just like I've never forgotten the example of the conversation he had with my colleague on the day he became president. Because today, as you say, we work with celebrity sports people. I work with important business leaders and other leaders, not so much politicians any longer. And if they don't have the common decency to return the greeting of the tea lady when they arrive at the office in the morning, then I think nothing of that person. I don't care how wealthy he is, how powerful she is, or whatever. If Nelson Mandela can greet the cleaning lady on her hands and knees polishing the floor, then who are you to think that you're too important or too whatever to not return the greeting of an employee who earns a fraction of what you do? So that's a very high benchmark. So people don't impress me, Nick, because I serve this extraordinary human being.
So, Rory, how best should we keep President Mandela's legacy alive? And what are the lessons we should keep remembering?
Well, as South Africans, we were pretty well on our way to forgetting the lessons and the legacy of Nelson Mandela around 20 years, after he changed our nation, changed the world, changed many of us, because people were becoming greedy for both power and money, something that he would never have permitted. People from his own party, it must have horrified him. So my wife is the principal of a prep school, and I'm very often asked to speak at schools. Perhaps it's a matriculation assembly or an awards assembly or a Mandela Day commemoration because they've been learning about him in history or whatever. And I always accept those invitations if I can, because it's very, very important to me, Nick, that the current generation of children who perhaps grew up not knowing the Mandela years, they must not forget the lessons that he taught us. So what did he teach us? Well, he taught us about kindness. He taught us about forgiveness. He loved children. I'm so proud that I served a president who loved children. He said things like, it's better to sit down and talk to your enemy than to fight with him. Now think about that in the context of what's going on in our world around us today. He also said that sport has the power to change the world because sport speaks to the youth in a language that they understand. And how true is that? You can have any number of policies and speeches and whatever, but sport and the power of and the emotional context of sport, he understood how that can change people, and he used it to change South Africa. And we see it now in the embodiment of our Springbok rugby team. We see that firsthand at work. I mean, they are now the benchmark of excellence. They are everything good about what South Africa can be. And those lessons we learned from him.
So, Rory, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, not only the future of leadership, but even current leadership. If I look at his example, it's got to be servant leadership. You can't be lording it over people beneath you. Yes, leadership requires decisive thinking and even decisive actions at certain times. And he demonstrated that time and again, and I can give you examples of that. But he was a servant leader. He would always allow debate, even if it was robust debate, even if he knew he had the answer. And I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, he did have the answer. But he would welcome debate so that everybody had a voice, everybody was heard. And that issue, whatever the issue was debated, as I say, even robustly. But once a collective decision was arrived at, then he expected everybody to buy in. So he allowed leadership and leaders to flourish, even under, I mean, there's been cliches about the aura of the man. I don't believe in auras. And, the fact that he had this magnetism because he was older than pretty much everybody that he led. So he had an incredible presence, but he never let that get in the way of people having a voice. So he allowed people to develop as leaders under them. Look, he didn't suffer fools gladly. And if you were mouthing off about nonsense, he would quickly cut you off and tell you that. But he was the ultimate example of a servant leader. He never tried to be the most important person. And he would gently guide debate, ask questions. And I think that, that's genuine leadership. People can't live in fear of a leader because then they're never going to realize their full potential. If they are encouraged to participate, to air their views, to say their say, and even if they're wrong, you can still learn from that. You abide then by the collective decision and you move on. And then you think about that and you think, well, maybe I could have done this differently. And you will absolutely learn and grow under a leader like that.
Now, Rory, you mentioned the next generation. You mentioned you're speaking to many schools. What is it we have to do different to build future leaders and to develop future leaders?
Well, I'm not sure we need to do a lot different, Nick, because this generation is very different. They think differently, they behave differently, their values are different, their expectations of a job and even its remuneration are very different. I think what we need to do is to avoid the pitfalls that we saw our country going down the road of. Leaders who want to get into or be elected to or appointed to positions of authority to serve themselves and their back pocket or their bank account is what we need to be very, very wary of. And that's why there's all kinds of mechanisms today. You could do integrity checks and you could do background checks on people because we need people we need servant leaders that are not there to serve themselves, that are there to serve whatever position in the organization that they've been appointed or elected to or whatever it is, not themselves first. So the primary focus must be on others. The primary focus must be on the success of the mission, not how do I enrich myself through this position that I've been elected to or appointed to or whatever. And the other thing I think we need to avoid in the current generation is, the notion that you stand with your hand out expecting people to put something into it. Instead of getting your head down and your backside up and start working hard, diligently, without stealing time or stealing anything else for that matter, so that your vocation has meaning and there's a purpose to what you do. If you're not happy in what you're doing, I don't think you should be doing it. Those are perceptions and principles that I think we need to inculcate. So I know, because as I said, I'm married to a school teacher, that our schools and the curricula there very often will focus on that. But I don't think that that is widely enough taught at our schools and our institutions of learning. If we could get one message across to this generation, let's first seek to serve the mission, whatever that mission is, and to serve others, the organization, the company that employed you, not to serve yourself, not to seek opportunities to use the position that you're in. And here I'm referring to political leaders. Don't use the position that you've either been appointed or elected to serve yourself. Because leaders in public office, I'm talking about specifically now, looking at him who was elected as a president, they serve us. We need to be the most important thing in their lives, not lording it over us. Not I've arrived, so I get the big flashy car and I get, bodyguards to protect me and drivers to drive me around because I've arrived. That is the wrong way to look at public leadership. Corporate leadership is the same thing. There are some very, very smart and bright people that should be questioning leadership, that should be interrogating decision-making and processes and policies to make the organization that they're employed by or serving in or whatever it is stronger. No leader should be surrounding him or herself with a bunch of yes men. They should be surrounding themselves with competent people who ask the difficult questions so that time is not lost in going down the wrong path and then having to make a U-turn and correct that wrong path. So, with those very basic kind of principles, I think that we need more of that kind of education for our children, for our young people, and for the current generation. That cannot be about what they get out of it. It must be about how they can serve.
Now, Rory, you spent 5 years with President Mandela. Have you written a book, or where can we find more lessons from?
I have written a book. I wrote a book in 2000, so it's pretty much out of print. But you can still get the odd copy on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and look for One Step Behind Mandela, you might find a few copies there. But I wrote the book because people would ask me what it was like to serve him. And I would tell stories like I've told you, and they would say, you need to write a book. So I did. Yeah.
And do you believe there should be a curriculum based on President Mandela's leadership?
I do. I mean, our children learn the history of our country. They learn where he was born and, what he did and what he stood for and the fact that he went to jail and all of that. But I think, in higher levels, so secondary education and tertiary education, there should absolutely be, leadership lessons. And I'm sure there are books that have been written on exactly that. What are the leadership lessons that we can learn? People far smarter than me should be establishing such curricula because our young people need that. In my view, our young people absolutely need that because many of them that are alive today at schools and moving into their first or second job, they don't remember the Mandela years. It's very sad. Yeah.
Now, Rory, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
On LinkedIn is the easiest. If you search for me on LinkedIn, I invite you to make contact with me. I will be delighted to answer any questions that you have. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Rory, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
It was great to learn from you.
And I hope that I was able to pass on some lessons that will resonate with some of your listeners and viewers. Thank you for having me, as I say.